Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In our last episode, we finished up talking about how the internet actually works, how data moves from one point of the earth to the next. But remember, when we started off this course, we talked a lot about how cyber was this mix between human and technical systems. So where do the humans come into play? So in this episode, I want to talk about how we actually can think about managing something as complex as the internet. Remember, the internet is this broad collection of independent networks that all have to work together. As we saw in our last few episodes, there's a lot going on. So how do we actually manage that? The problem is, how do we manage the broad set of issues surrounding this technology? And those issues aren't necessarily all technical. What do I mean by that? So what type of concerns do I mean? Well, they might be technical in nature. So I might have a new technology that I want to leverage on the internet. Well, who comes up with the rules to do so? What are the institutions and processes I need in order to make that happen? They might be, concerns surrounding the private sector. Companies have to make decisions on what type of information they need to protect. And who gets to make that decision? It could be public in nature. So governments might want to make a determination that there are some organizations that are so critically important that they have a right to regulate. How do they make that decision? Who decides? These are important questions. Finally, there might be broad-based international concerns. How do governments interact with one another? Are there certain rules of the game that they want to come up with that determine whether something is allowable under international laws and norms? So this concept of process and institutions working together to actually create a set of rules is something that we call governance. So in order to manage the myriad of technical, privacy, operational issues, we need human processes. The technology is not going to get us there. The set of processes we use constitutes governance. There are multiple what we call stakeholders involved in this process. It's not simply about national leaders. The private sector is involved. Not-for-profit institutions are involved. Local, state, federal policymakers are involved. All of them together, working together, constitute a variety of different stakeholders in a multi-stakeholder process that allows us to govern all the various complexities of the internet. So something as large as the internet requires governance structures. But it's important to remember that governance is not simply about managing the technology. It also requires us to have processes that manage the myriad of organizational challenges. How do we assess risk in critical infrastructure? How do we manage the relations between countries? These are fundamentally non-technical questions. They're informed by the technology, but they themselves are human processes that we need to be able to manage. Some of these institutions and processes even discuss cyber activity that is permissible under international law. What I mean by that is, are countries able to apply cyber activity in an offensive way? And if so, what are the rules of the game? Are there certain things that are too critical that we absolutely want to make sure that no one touches? Those are agreed to rules between nations. Those are happening at a non-technical level and require a governance structure from multiple stakeholders. So what do we take away from this particular episode? The complexity of the internet requires institutions and processes to help manage the broad level of complexity we see in the internet. Remember, the last several episodes talked specifically about the technology and talked about how data moved from one point of the earth to the next. Those are rules that are established. Those rules are established by people. And that's fundamentally important to understand when we want to talk about security. Because based on decisions that people make, there might be some vulnerabilities that are introduced. We need to understand that process. Governance is that process by which we manage the technical, informational, and organizational problems that arise. And finally, multiple stakeholders are involved in this process. It's not simply about national leaders. The private sector is involved. Individual citizens are involved. Not-for-profits, local, state, federal governments, and frankly, even international government structures are heavily involved. In our next episode, we're going to talk about a few of the internet governance structures that exist. I hope to see you next time.